Thank you, Professor Ma, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the Taiwan EPA and ITRI for inviting me here today to speak to you all. I'd just like to start with a quick overview on the Global CCS Institute. We were established in 2009 and are a member-based organisation with over 300 members, including governments, companies and research institutes around the world. We are a global organisation with our headquarters recently relocating from Canberra to Melbourne in Australia. We operate across 3 regions in the world. The Europe, Middle East and Africa office operates out of Brussels. Our Americas regional office is based in Washington DC, and I'm very pleased that my colleague Victor Derb, the General Manager for the Americas, is here today as well. And the Asia Pacific team, which I lead, has offices in Tokyo, Beijing and Melbourne. Our mission at the Institute is to accelerate the development, demonstration and deployment of CCS globally. We have 3 key strategies to assist in this mission. The first is authoritative knowledge sharing, and I congratulate Taiwan on establishing your new CCS association, because this will be an important vehicle for you to help share knowledge both amongst yourselves here in Taiwan and with other organisations around the world. We also engage in fact-based influential advice and advocacy, and finally working towards creating favourable conditions for the deployment of CCS. Some examples of the activities we undertake are bringing together CCS experts at our member meetings all around the world. We publish a wide range of expert reports on CCS. We actively contribute in many international forums to working with our partners such as the IEA, as well as at the UN climate talks each year. And finally, we track and publish developments in large-scale CCS projects, and that's what I'm going to focus most of my presentation on today. So, as Yuho has pointed out in his presentation, we know that greenhouse gas emissions from human activities are causing global temperatures to increase and our climate to change. The latest science tells us that we need to make substantial cuts to these emissions if we're going to keep global temperature increases to below 2 degrees and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. As a global community, we need to find new ways to produce energy and other industrial products like cement and steel while cutting our emissions. It's a challenging task and will require a full portfolio of low emissions technologies. We think that CCS is vital, but it is one of these technologies. And many credible and independent bodies, such as the IEA, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, are observing that achieving temperature increases to no more than 2 degrees is almost impossible, or at least vastly more expensive if we were to exclude CCS. So at the Institute, we track large-scale integrated CCS projects around the world as a way of monitoring the developments in CCS. Each year we release an annual report on the global status of CCS, and we often produce an update mid-year. The recent update was released in February 2014. We consider large-scale CCS projects to be those in the industrial sector that capture at least 400,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum. For coal-fired power stations, large-scale projects are those that capture at least 800,000 tonnes of CO2 each year. And so whilst we have and we track many of these large-scale projects, I also just wanted to flag that there are many other notable smaller projects around the world that are important in demonstrating our learnings and improving our understanding of CCS, and I think you'll hear about some of those projects today as well. Now looking at large-scale integrated CCS projects around the world. This slide illustrates the pipeline of CCS projects under development. At the Institute, we look at 5 phases of this development, starting at the identify through to evaluate and defining these projects. Once a final investment decision has been made, these projects move to execute or construction phase, and finally we have operating projects. There are currently 12 large-scale CCS projects operating around the world and 9 under construction. We expect 2 of these projects under construction to commence operating in the next year. And these are going to mark particularly important milestones in CCS development. And I'll talk about a little bit about these 2 projects later on. They are the Boundary Dam and Kemba County projects. The reason they're significant is they will represent the world's first large-scale CCS projects in the power sector. 6 of the 15 projects of the defined phase are at advanced stages of planning, and we expect that they may be in a position to make final investment decisions in the coming year as well. But while we see an increasing number of projects moving through to construction and operation, there has been a decline in the number of projects entering that early phase of the development pipeline, and we know that it's essential that we continue to see new projects being identified and commencing development. So now looking at the CCS projects around the world and what their capacity to capture is. We consider that if you look at the number of large-scale projects under construction or operating, that they have the capacity to currently capture 40 million tonnes of CO2 per annum. If all of the CCS projects in that pipeline that I showed you on the previous slide were constructed and operating, by 2020 they would have the capacity to capture up to 100 million tonnes of CO2 per annum. But to put this in perspective, Taiwan alone emits over 250 million tonnes per annum, and in Australia we emit over 600 million tonnes per annum. So we obviously need to increase the significant investment and the capture volumes of our CCS plants around the world. Now looking at where these large-scale projects are happening, we can see that the location of CCS projects is changing over time. Several years ago, in 2011, the key areas of focus were in the United States and continental Europe. But we've seen a significant shift. In continental Europe, we've seen a significant decline in the number of CCS projects being considered. A number have been cancelled or put on hold recently. There are a range of factors for this, but chief amongst them is the general economic conditions as well as the low carbon price. So whilst things are on the decline in continental Europe, we are seeing an increase, however, and continued activity in the US and Canada. We're also seeing progress in the United Kingdom. And I just wanted to talk quickly about 2 of the large-scale projects in the UK that have recently received funding under the UK's Carbon Capture and Storage Commercialisation Programme, which is the UK government's $1 billion competition to support large-scale CCS projects. Both of these projects have just entered into contracts with the UK government to undertake front-end engineering designs. They are the White Rose CCS project in North Yorkshire and the Peterhead CCS project in Scotland. White Rose will be a new 426 megawatt supercritical coal-fired power station. It will capture around 2 million tonnes of CO2 per annum and use Alstom's oxy-fuel combustion technology. The CO2 will be transported offshore storage in the North Sea via a common use pipeline. The project entered into the FEED contract with the UK government in late last year, and the FEED study is expected to run for 2 years. The project will hopefully make a final investment decision and commence construction in around 2016, with the capture of CO2 expected to commence by 2020. The Peterhead project is likewise in the power sector, but is based on a gas-fired power station. It will be retrofitting a 385 megawatt unit with post-combustion capture. Approximately 1 million tonnes of CO2 per annum will be captured and stored 100 kilometres offshore in a depleted gas reservoir in the North Sea. The pre-feasibility for the capture plant was completed in 2010, and they entered into their FEED contract with the UK government in February this year. FEED is expected in 2015, and hopefully the project will become operational by 2018. But the key area of growth we're seeing around the world is China. The number of projects under consideration in China have doubled since 2011, and there are currently 12 projects at the various stages of consideration. And I'll talk about one of those in particular later on when I focus in on a few of the projects. Another trend that we're seeing in these large-scale CCS projects is the sectors that they're being constructed in and the types of storage that they're undertaking. As you have pointed out in his presentation, large-scale CCS projects have been predominantly occurring in the natural gas processing sector, but over time we see a general shift, we've got the slide there, towards other sectors, the industrial sector and the power sector. We'll also see at the moment predominantly the CO2 that is being captured being used for enhanced oil recovery, and that's providing a business case for these projects at the point in time when climate policies aren't strong enough to support these projects. But over time, we expect an increasing number of projects to shift from using the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery to using it for dedicated geological storage. And these projects are important in the short term because they help shore up our knowledge and understanding of storing CO2 in deep saline aquifers. So just to focus quickly on showcasing a couple of these large-scale projects, and I won't dally too much on the US projects in particular because I know that Vic will be talking to you about developments in the US later in his presentation. But as I flagged, we have two milestone projects in CCS commencing operation in the next year. They are the Boundary Dam and Kemper County projects. Boundary Dam will be the world's first large-scale CCS project in the power sector. We expect it to commence operation in the latter half of this year. Its capture facilities will reduce CO2 emissions from unit number 3 at the Lignite Boundary Dam Power Station in Canada by up to 90%, and when fully operational will capture up to 1 million tonnes of CO2 per annum. I think the significant thing about this project, however, though, is that SAS Power, who operated and built the plant, are already considering their next development. And they expect that the capital cost of the next unit will be significantly reduced by up to 25%. They also expect that they won't need any financial subsidisation by either the federal or provincial governments. We're already seeing significant learnings and developments occurring there in Canada. The Kemper County IGCC project in Mississippi is expected to become operational late this year or early next year. Unlike Boundary Dam, this is a new plant, a 582 megawatt plant using the transport integrated gasification technology developed by Southern Company. It's a coal gasification method for low-rate coals. The plant will capture up 65% of the CO2 emissions from the facility, or approximately 3.5 million tonnes per annum. The project has secured significant funding from federal, state and local incentive programs. Moving away though from the power sector, another significant project is the Yancheng Integrated CCS Demonstration Project in China. This will be a pre-combustion caster unit from a cold chemical gasification plant. The first phase has already commenced operation in 2012 and it currently captures 50,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum. This phase will be expanded to capture up to 100,000 tonnes per annum by the end of next year. They intend on building a second facility which will capture at least 360,000 tonnes of CO2, and we hope that will also be operating in 2015. The captured CO2 is being transferred to oil fields in the Ordos Basin in central China and being used for enhanced oil recovery. The final example of the large-scale CCS project that I just wanted to highlight is the Emirates Steel Industries project in Abu Dhabi. This will be the first large-scale CCS project in the steel industry, and it captures CO2 emissions from the Emirates Steel factory. These will be transported again for enhanced oil recovery in oil fields. The project is currently under construction and they expect to start capturing CO2 from 2016. So now moving away from specifically talking about large-scale projects and to touch briefly on what are some of the things that we think we'll need to see more of to ensure that we continue to deploy large-scale integrated CCS projects. So Yuho has already touched on the fact that CCS is not an unproven or experimental technology. There's a long history of the applications of the various CCS components around the world. We see large-scale CO2 separation happening as a matter of course in gas processing and many industrial processes. CO2 pipelines are established technology used on land and undersea. And large-scale injection and geological storage of CO2 has been safely performed in saline aquifers for up to 15 years and in oil and gas reservoirs for many decades more. There are, though, as pointed out in the previous presentation, a couple of key technical challenges before we'll see widespread deployment of CCS. We need to continue to demonstrate integration of all of these technology components into integrated projects and to demonstrate them in new sectors. We also need to continue to investigate and shore up storage sites because we know it can take as many as 10 years or more to prove up a storage site. There's been some recent developments in legal and regulatory for CCS around the world, and I just wanted to briefly touch on those. At the international level, climate change negotiations are reaching an important stage. Currently, we know that 90 nations representing 80% of the world's emissions have signed up to emission reduction commitments for 2020. But the international community has commenced discussions on what emissions reduction targets might look like in the post-2020 phase. This will be all culminating in discussions at the Paris meeting, the Conference of the Parties of the UN, late next year, where it's hoped that an agreement for post-2020 targets can be reached. These targets will be important for CCS projects because they'll provide clarity and certainty on the need to cut emissions into the future. At the national level, there have also been some other important developments. I think many of you know the EU introduced its directive for CCS in 2009, and my colleague Ian, I think, spoke in some detail about that directive at this conference last year. The directive has been implemented in almost all EU countries, and the EU has announced recently that it's undertaking a review of this directive. As this is one of the world's most comprehensive CCS regulatory regimes, this review is likely to include some really important learnings for other countries and regions around the world. Another important recent development is the UK Energy Act, which was introduced at the end of last year. This includes two strong support mechanisms for CCS in the UK. The first being emissions performance standards have been introduced for new coal-fired power stations. This will require all new coal-fired power stations in the UK to be CCS ready and emit no more than 450 kilograms of CO2 per metre of power. We know that this is half the emissions from a standard coal-fired power station that's built these days. The other measure introduced under the UK's Energy Act is the feed-in tariff, or the contract for difference program that you have alluded to. This will be replacing the UK's renewables obligation scheme, but we expanded to also explicitly allow eligibility for CCS projects, and thereby giving project proponents for CCS projects a certain or guaranteed revenue stream over the lifetime of their project to help them get those projects up and running. Another just quick new development I'd like to flag is in Alberta. Alberta has an existing CCS regulatory regime, but they undertook a really comprehensive international assessment which brought together parties from across the world, over 200 people, I think, at that time. They've recently released the assessment and has over 79 recommendations for the Alberta government how it can improve and strengthen its regulatory regime. And I think we'll all be watching to see where the government takes those recommendations. There's been developments in the US, but I'll leave those to Vic to talk to you about in more detail. So just to quickly touch upon some of the things that we think we need. Again, these echo the comments of the previous speaker. We need to see strong commitments to cutting emissions and clear policies that will support these emissions reduction targets. We need to boost short-term financing for CCS demonstration projects and research development. We need regulatory barriers to be removed to ensure that there are clear and robust schemes in place. But most importantly, we need to make sure that CCS is on an equal footing with other low emissions technologies. The final element that I wanted to talk about, and I think that this has some resonance in Taiwan, which is the importance of public awareness and understanding of CCS projects. So public engagement and understanding is critical for the technology's deployment. Research shows that there is generally a low understanding and acceptance of CCS by the public across countries. There are a few exceptions, such as in Alberta and Canada, where there's been significant work undertaken. Some CCS projects have faced strong public opposition, largely when there's been onshore storage, but it has been across a number of locations. And this has seen projects increasing their focus on the importance of engaging with the public. On this slide here, we step out a few key steps or stages that we think projects should undertake to ensure that they have effective public engagement. The first one sounds a bit basic, but it's about ensuring that you have communication staff as integral members of your project team from the outset of the project. Successfully deployed projects have almost always included communication staff as part of their project team from day one. So that means that along with planning the technical details, the social and the economic, the public are also factored into the decisions in making their projects. Such projects have recognised the need to invest in more than the business as usual approach. The road project in Rotterdam in the Netherlands cites this as the first key lesson that can be taken from its key successful project public engagement. The second element that we've recommended is that a project's social context is considered as a fundamental part of the project decision making. CCS projects invest large resources in time and money into selecting a site based on geological and technical suitability. However, often these selections don't adequately consider the social context where these projects are being located. The The third thing is ensuring that there is early engagement. The timing of a project's community engagement is shown to have a decisive influence on the acceptance of a project. Early engagement with local affected communities, regulators, interested academics, local environmental NGOs, regulators, industry bodies, has emerged as the best approach to facilitate meaningful participation. Not surprisingly, evidence has shown that announcing project plans before engaging with the local community has led to significant conflict. The fourth step we mention here is targeted messaging. Both what and how messages are communicated will have a significant impact on the way a project is perceived and ultimately deployed. Framing and messaging can be site and stakeholder specific. Where projects have worked well, they have taken the time to consider the stakeholders they are impacting and have framed their project communications and messaging to address specific questions like, what is the value of this project? Why is it taking place here? Why should I care about this? And what are the direct impacts on me? The fifth step is flexible project implementation strategies. So project uncertainty and delays can be costly, but it's been shown on a number of occasions that having some flexibility to respond to feedback and comments from the public, or by identifying multiple options and consulting actively with stakeholders, that it can lead to better decision making and more successful projects. Shell's Quest CCS project in Alberta, Canada made 30 different changes to its proposed pipeline route following community feedback. And it recently announced that it has successfully passed through its public permissions process. The final stage to mention here is education and creating tangible experiences. Tangible experiences promote understanding and acceptance, and we think there's two basic approaches to this. The first through formal education, and the second through outreach activities. Education through schools is about integrating an education program on climate change and low emissions technologies, including CCS, into actual school curriculum, so that it's taught as part of the students' regular classes. The Institute has adopted and implemented this approach in Australia and Canada in a range of schools. The second approach is what we call education through outreach events. This is where school students or even members of the community learn about climate change and low emissions technologies, including CCS, through workshops or other events, perhaps at conferences or community festivals. We facilitated this approach in Japan, and we're helping to promote the outreach of a project in Spain as well. Another successful example is the Southwest Hub project in Western Australia. They've dedicated significant effort into including the community in its developments of the project and design outreach activities around its seismic surveys, helping to increase access to land from landholders to ensure it can undertake the work that it needs to. Just on that, the Institute has two new initiatives which are particularly important for not just knowledge sharing amongst experts on CCS, but also amongst the general public. And these are two new websites that we've launched. The first is called Decarbonise, and it's a website which includes technical papers across the full range of CCS chain, but also other low emissions technologies. So it's about showing the role that CCS plays amongst other low emissions technologies. We've also released recently a new website called CO2 Degrees. This is aimed not at the expert, but more at the general public. And again, it looks at the full range of options of reducing emissions to address climate change, but includes amongst those important information on CCS. So just to finish up, we know that the different components of CCS technology are proven. We know that they're deployed around the world. But we know that we need to see more large-scale demonstrated integrated CCS projects. 2014 will be a critical year where we'll see these two large-scale projects emerging in the power sector. But for there to be continued successful deployment of CCS, we need to see continued funding for CCS research and development, continued collaboration and knowledge sharing across the CCS community, and importantly, sustained policy support that includes long-term commitment to cutting emissions and strong policies that don't disadvantage CCS.